about Exodus chapter 2. And what kind of things did we talk about? Can somebody explain to me what happens in Exodus chapter 2? Who's born? Moses went for a boat ride. Yeah, that's probably the best way you can explain it, right? Moses goes for a boat ride. What's the law of the land right now in Egypt? Kill baby boys, right? And Moses' parents, they have a boy, and they try to hide him for about 3 months. When they realize they can't hide him anymore, they put him in what it calls an ark or a basket, depending on your translation. And they put him in, and they place him in the river among the weeds. And who ends up finding him? Pharaoh's daughter. And she picks him up out of the water and says, "Oh my goodness, this baby's beautiful. I want to take care of him. I'll name him Moses." And what does the name Moses mean? Drew him out of the water, right? Talk about that a little bit. What we're going to kind of skip over a little bit tonight is after Moses, okay, how long is Moses, who raises Moses? Let me ask you that question. Who raises Moses? His parents. Till about what age? Probably about 3 or 5, right? Remember, Moses' sister is there watching him, and when Pharaoh's daughter picks him up, she all of a sudden realizes, I need somebody to take care for this baby. And then voila, here comes Moses' sister, right? Conveniently. And she says, I know somebody. And it's his mom. So she acts as a wet nurse towards him. So probably about the ages of 3 or 5, most scholars believe, we're not exactly told in the scriptures. But Moses is raised with his mom, and then he goes and lives with Pharaoh's daughter, right? And some things we realized is, does Moses know who he is, nationality-wise and religious-wise? Yes. He understands that he is a Hebrew. The Israelites are his people, and God is his God. That's what he understands. What we didn't get to on Sunday, we're going to go over it a little bit, but not get too deep into it, is after that, in between verses 10 and 11, you have about a time period of roughly 35 to 40 years, right? We get one of those time jumps that we're not told about. You just have to kind of figure it out later, right? It's not one of those, and the next day, right? It's about 35, 40 years. Now, Moses is a grown adult man. He's as old as I am, which then makes me feel really old when I start talking about Moses. And he sees his people being abused by a taskmaster. So, if you know the account, what does he do to that time? He kills him, right? He kills the Egyptian, abusing him. And the Israelites go, oh, thank you so much, Moses, for doing this. No, what do they say? Are you judge over us? Right? And now the Egyptians are looking to kill Moses. They're seeking his life because he is now guilty of killing another Egyptian. So he runs away out into the wilderness. And there he'll spend about another 40 years. And in this time he becomes a shepherd. He ends up getting married. And he has a father-in-law named Jethro. And that's going to lead us now into chapter 3. And if somebody can, at chapter 2, read chapter 2, verses 23 through 25. I want to make sure we get this point.
During those many days, the king of Egypt died. The people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God. And God heard their groaning. And God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel and God.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Okay. So during this whole time, what's going on to the Israelites? Moses is off in the wilderness. He's living the shepherd life. What's going on with the Israelites, though, during this time? They're trying to make bricks, right, with no straw, with all this stuff, right? And they're being beaten and enslaved. I don't think they don't have any straw yet. That's going to come later. But they're trying to make bricks. They're being beaten and abused, and they're crying to God, right? If you're an Israelite at this time in Egypt, what are you thinking maybe about God? He's abandoned us, right? Here we are, we're God's people, now we're enslaved. It's been years at this point, right? You're looking close to about 80 years now for sure that they've been slaves, probably even longer. And God is nowhere to be found. How do we even end up in this situation? This isn't even where we're supposed to be. But then what do we see God do? He does something in verses 24 and 25. He hears and he remembers. Right? And what specifically does he remember? His promises. Right? I want us to realize something here, and this is the point that came across, is the Lord God hears our prayers and he remembers his promises. Yes, Tim. And he's concerned about them as well, right? It's not just, oh, I hear them and I remember, but it says, and they found favor, right? He looked upon them and had respect towards them or concern towards them, yes.
The timing of all of this is, from our perspective, is one-sided.
Yep.
You know, if I was an Israelite and I was being enslaved and beaten and made to do all this stuff, I would want to be liberated as soon as possible.
Yeah.
As soon as I said, God, help me, he needs to be busy about doing it. But from God's perspective, there were certain things that had to come to fruition before he was going to fulfill these promises. Early in Genesis, he had said that it wasn't time for them to go in because the time of the Amorites hadn't been, they hadn't, I guess, went as bad as they're supposed to. So we always have to remember that anytime we're calling out to God, we got to look beyond our timeline and think in terms of God's timeline.
Yeah, exactly, right. We have our viewpoint, like you said, right? And again, I mean, this is 80 some odd years now. These are people's lifetimes, right? There's people being born and dying under Egyptian slavery, right? And they're thinking, God's nowhere. But then God's looking at the big picture. Well, they can't conquer the land yet because my wrath isn't full with them yet. And I need to get Moses prepared to lead these people because I know what's going to come down, right? There's all these different things. So very good point. Any other thoughts before we jump into chapter 3? All right, excellent. So we're going to jump into chapter 3, and we're going to see here in chapter 3 and 4, God answers. He answers the Israelites, and he answers Moses. If somebody can read chapter 3 and read verses 1 through 6 for me, please. Not.
Moses was keeping the flock with his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire in the midst of the bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that, then he turned aside to see. God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses, and he said, Here I am. Then he said, Do not come near, take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, and the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God.
All right, perfect. All right, so Moses is out keeping the flock, his father-in-law's flock, like he's supposed to be doing, and what does he see? What grabs his attention? A burning bush. What's so special about this burning bush? Yeah, it wouldn't consume. It's just a burning bush. It's not turning into anything, right? And so he goes and he says, hey, let's go see what's going on here, right? That would probably draw my attention as well. And he walks over there, and a voice calls out to him. And what does the voice say? Not yet. Almost. We're getting there. What does he first say? Don't come any closer. Moses, whoop, hold up, stop right there. And then Moses says, here I am. And then what does he tell him? Take off your shoes. Why? You're on holy ground. Would that get your attention? Probably, right? You have a bush that's burning. It knows your name. It tells you take off your shoes, right? You're on holy ground. And then the voice announces itself. Who is the voice? I am. Who is it? God, right? And then he even gets even deeper, right? I am God. I am the God of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob, right? I am your God. I am the God. And now what he's going to do is he's going to call Moses to do some things. And a lot of times we look at this section of verses here, chapter 3 and into chapter 4, and we look at kind of Moses' side of it, right? And we see and we always go, oh, Moses said this and Moses did that. Tonight what I want us to do, though, is a little different, is I want us to look at what God says to Moses and then take what God says and see where he applies it to us today, all right? So somebody could read, let's look at the first calling. If somebody could read verses 7 through 10 for me. All right, perfect. Okay. So God tells Moses some stuff. What does he tell him? Good job with those names, by the way. Appreciate that. Taking count of all those nations. That's always fun. What does he say? He says, Moses, I've heard the people, right? And what am I going to do for them? I'm going to get them, right? And where is he going to take them to? I'm going to take them to the promised land, right? Remember, he remembered the promises back to Isaac and Jacob and Abraham at the end of chapter 2. What were those promises, by the way? First one was what? Nation, land, and the seed. Is there a great nation now? Would you consider them that? Yeah, right? Roughly, we've talked about it a couple times now, right? Roughly 2 million people, right? Give or take a couple 100,000. Anywhere up to like 3 million. Yeah, I would say that's a pretty big nation, right? If you said, hey, your descendants, you're going to have about 2 million descendants, would you think, man, that's pretty awesome, right? And the second one is the land promise. And God says, I am now going to fulfill this promise. And then he tells Moses what? He says, I'm going to do this. And guess what, Moses? You're going to be the one who does it for me. How would you like to get that call? Right? You know the Egyptians. Moses knows the Egyptians, right? Remember, he was raised with them. He knows how powerful they are. He knows how cruel they can be. And if you think about it, right, you ran away from that. You've been away from that for 40 years. And then somebody says, hey, I'm going to need you to go back there and go tell them some things that they're not going to want to hear. How would you react to that? Nope. Right? Good one. Right? I've lived that life. I know that life. I don't want it. But what I want us to know, the first thing is God calls Moses to action. He tells them, Moses, you need to go do some things for me. Now, do we see that anywhere in the New Testament with us? Can anybody think of any verses? Yeah, turn to Matthew chapter 28. Matthew 28. Tim, if you could read verses 18 through 20 for us. Yep, you're good. 18 through 20 of Matthew 28.
Jesus came to him and said, all authority in heaven and on earth is given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the world.
All right, what's the command here? What's the call to action? Go, right? It's the same thing he tells Moses. Go. Go do this for me. Specifically here to the apostles, what is he telling them? Go do what? Preach, teach, make disciples, right? In other words, I want you to go and free my people. Right? Just as in Exodus, Moses is told, go free my people. God told the apostles, and he tells us, go free my people. Now, are we freeing people from Egypt? No, where were we freeing them from? Sin, bondage, right? Satan, his kingdom. He's saying, go. Go out and tell them. Now, I don't know how much you pay attention to the world around you today. Does that sound like a fun thing to do? Not really, right? It's one of those things that sounds really easy, right? Go and teach. Oh, yeah, I could do that. And then it comes time to do it, and you're like, ugh. Right? And so you can see where, yes. Yeah. Yep. Exactly, right. You jumped ahead of me, but that's okay. No, you're good. Yeah, but that's exactly the whole point of this whole conversation is God ultimately is trying to get through Moses' head. You're not going to do this on your own. You won't be able to do this on your own. I'm going to do it, but I'm going to use you to do it, right? And that's the same with us. We're not good enough to go out and preach on our own, right? We're just not. But with God's help, we can be. And with his word, we can be. Very good point. Somebody turn to Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 24, something else we're called to do. Somebody could read Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24. What are we supposed to do? Stir up what? One another to do what? Love and good works. Do you encourage your brothers and sisters? Apart from Wednesdays and Sundays? Hopefully we do, right? I know I need to work on that. Right? That's another thing we're called to do. And we're going to see here with Moses, as he's going along in his journey here with the Israelites, there's going to be times where he needs to provoke them or encourage them to do what God wants them to do. And is that an easy task for Moses? No, it's not, right? There's going to be times where Moses is going to look at God and be like, what are you doing? Right? Why are you dealing with these people? And there's going to be times where God looks at Moses and said, I'm done with these people. And then Moses has to intercede and be like, oh, what? Hold on, right? So again, right, we're called not only to go tell other people about God, but we're also called to encourage each other. All right, any other thoughts on this idea of being called to action? Yep. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, and you bring a very good point, right? Right now, this relationship really is Moses pretty much, I guess you can say for lack of a better term, freaked out of his mind, right? I would be, and saying, who am I? Am I even worthy enough to do this? And then later in Exodus, you see him, like you said, on the same page with God, understanding the plan, understanding his role in that plan, and what his job is in line with God's will. Very good point.
I was thinking about Paul when he said he's not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation. So he didn't say, I'm not ashamed of the preacher. He said, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. God has given the power for salvation in the gospel. It's not any of the preacher, although he uses the preacher. And so here he's saying, I'm going to send you, but I'm going to be with you. And you're going to bring them out. So to the point that we're not all in the bag of chips.
Yeah.
We're just the vehicle that God is using, and if it's not us, it's going to be some other way.
Yep.
Because God can do it.
Exactly, right. It's getting over, I guess for lack of a better term, ego.
But
Right.
then there's the thought of, well, he didn't want to go back to Egypt first off because Pharaoh's out to kill him.
Yeah.
That was the part we skipped over
Yep.
real fast. That Pharaoh's going to kill him. That's why he left. So he doesn't want to go back for that. But also, he knows how important the slaves are.
Yeah.
So how's he going to listen to that?
Yep.
So the message has got a negative connotation, and he's bringing that negative connotation to Pharaoh. And I'm thinking about the apostles when they would get arrested. They said, "Well, who are we going to serve? You
Yep.
or God?" And then Jesus, he answered any objections to, well, it's a difficult message when he says, look what they did to me. And are my disciples beyond,
Yep.
reproach on getting treated that way? No, the disciples of the master get treated like the master.
Exactly right. And especially with that, we always sit there and go, well, why would they do this to me? Well, they did it to Jesus, right? If they're going to do it to him, guess what? They're going to do it to you too. And then that actually leads us into our next point. Somebody read verses 11 and 12. We want to see God's next answer here. Exodus 3:11 through 12. Perfect, thank you. Yeah, so we get Moses' response, right? Here's his call to action, and Moses says, I'm not worthy of this, right? Who am I? Right? You got the wrong guy here, God. And God's response is what? I will what? I will be with you. Does that kind of answer Moses' question there? Yeah, right. If, for example, in the workplace, your boss tells you, hey, I want you to go tell all the employees, right, whatever. Okay, we'll pick a non-fun message. They all have to work overtime on Friday, right? That's a bummer. And your response is first going to be like, I don't want to do it, right? But then the boss says, I'm going to be there with you when you tell them. Right? Does that give you a little bit more confidence in telling them what you need to tell them? Yeah, why? Because you have the boss right behind you, right? Basically saying, go talk to him, right, if you have any complaints. Now imagine God says, I'm with you. How much confidence should that give you? A whole lot, right? Yeah, and that's also a very good example to us in that when Jesus makes this prayer, right, of let this cup pass from me, but your will be done. And God comforts him. And Jesus knows if I turn to the Father, he will help me in my comfort. How much more then will he do that for us? Right? If I can't do this, God, I can't go talk to other people about you. Do you not think God will give you that comfort, that strength, that whatever it is you need to help you? Derek, did you have a point? Yeah.
So he answers it in a very subtle way. He tells exactly the way you see the message.
Yep.
You're not the one that is doing any of this. I'm the one who's doing it. Okay, so the evidence that you're going to have, I want to tell you right now what's going to happen. What's going to happen is you're coming back to this place. What that should have connected for Moses, and perhaps it did a little bit, is that, he's concerned about going back, perhaps for his own life, his own safety. God said, you're coming back here. So no matter what, he's surviving.
Yeah.
He's coming back to serve God on the mountain.
Yeah, exactly, right? And that's a very good point. That's not even one I considered, right? But yeah, exactly. He tells them, you're bringing the people, and you are all going to come right back here. You're bringing them. So really, right, that should click in his mind. Well, no matter what happens, I'm at least coming back, right? I don't know about everybody else, but I know at least I'm good because God just said it, right? And if God says it's going to be done. Steve?
It extracts to me that God's not expecting that Moses gets the results by himself.
Mhm.
And a lot of times we think that, if we get rejected, it's on us.
Yeah.
But it's not. We're rejecting God. It's like when, in the time of the judges, they wanted a king. And was it Samuel that was all upset?
Yeah.
He says, they're not rejecting you, Samuel. They're rejecting me.
Yep.
So when we spread the message as our call of action, it's the message that does the saving. If they don't accept it, it's not on us.
Exactly.
But then there's this lesson that we learn from the Old Testament, from Ezekiel. And he says, look, the watchman has to call out, because if you don't call out, then their blood is on your head. But if you call out and they don't listen, it's not on your head. And so if we are called to call out the message and we don't do it, then we're going to be held accountable.
Yeah, exactly. The way I always think about it is I'm a project manager for work, and one of the things we tell, like a joke we always have among the project managers, but it's very true, is put it on the client, right? In other words, you take care of everything you're supposed to take care of, no matter the project, and you make it to where you're waiting on the client or the vendor to do something. Because then if they start complaining and throwing a fit, which they always do, right? You can then look at them and say, I have done everything I'm supposed to do. It is now on you, right? And it's the same way. God tells us to do something. We need to put it on the listener, right? We need to do our part, spread the message, and then when the listener turns around and tries to complain, God will say, well, they did everything they were supposed to do. They told you about me, right? Very good point. Somebody look at Romans chapter 8 and read verses 38 through 39. Romans 8, verses 38 through 39, if somebody could read that for me.
I am convinced that nothing can ever separate us from God's love, which Christ Jesus our Lord shows us. We can't be separated by death, or life, by angels or rulers, by anything in the present or anything in the future, by forces or powers of the world above, and the world below, or by anything else in creation.
Perfect. All right. What can separate you from God? From God's love? Nothing. Right? And what kind of things does he mention there? Does Paul mention there in Romans? Supernatural things, natural things, right? Nor height, nor depth, nor width, nor anything, right? Not even time, right? Time itself can't separate you from God's love. So Moses is supposed to be super confident when God says, I'm with you. You're coming back to this mountain. And then God over here in Romans says, nothing's going to separate you from my love. How confident then should we be in doing what he wants us to do? Overconfident, right? Now, how confident are we really? That's the real question, right? Because I can tell you right now, I don't feel overconfident. I know I should be, but am I? Right? Any thoughts on that?
Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief.
Yeah, I believe, but help my unbelief. All right, let's look at the next thing. Moses is going to ask God a question here in chapter 3. Somebody read verses 13 through 22. Let's see God's next answer. Exodus 3, 13 through 22.
Moses asked God, if I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I tell them? God replied to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent you. God also said to Moses, say this to the Israelites, the Lord your God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever. This is how I am to be remembered in every generation. Go and assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has appeared to me, and said, I have paid close attention to you and what has been done to you. And I have promised you that I will bring you up from the land of the misery of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. They will listen to what you say. Then you, along with the elders of Israel, must go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord your God of the Hebrews has met with us. Now please let us go on a 3-day trip into the wilderness, so that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. However, the king of Egypt will not allow you to go, even under force from a strong hand. But when I stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all my miracles that I will perform in it, after that he will let you go. And I will give these people such favor with the Egyptians that when you go, you will not go empty-handed.
Yeah.
Ask your neighbor, any woman staying in her house, with silver and gold, jewelry, wood, and clothing, and you will put them on your sons and daughters, so you will plunder the Egyptians.
All right, perfect. Okay, what's Moses' next question or next concern? God, I'm going to get there and I'm going to say, God told me to save you. And they're going to say what? What's right? That seems kind of like an obvious question. You know, for a long time I read this and I'd be like, why would they ask that? Well, genuinely, if somebody said, hey, I spoke to God, right, what would be one of the first questions you'd ask? Hey, what's his name? Right? And so that's Moses' next excuse question, right? Well, what am I going to do about this, God? And what does God tell him? He tells him what? Tell him my name, right? You tell them I am sent you. And then he explains that further, right? I am, and then he says what? I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. In other words, all these accounts that have been passed down through your guys' history, right, for these close to 400 years from the time you guys came into this land. You know who your fathers are, right? You still have Joseph's bones laying in a tomb there in Egypt. You guys know who these people are. I'm that God. The one that they followed throughout their whole lives for. The ones that you know the promises about. I'm him. And then he goes on to explain pretty much the next 15 chapters of Exodus. What's going to happen? He says, you're going to go down there and you're going to ask Pharaoh for what? A 3-day weekend, pretty much, right? Say, go down there, you, Aaron, or you, and who else are you going to take with you? You're going to take somebody else with you. What group of people are you going to take with you to go see Pharaoh? The elders of Israel, right? The tribe elders. You're going to take them. You're all going to go to Pharaoh, and you're going to say, God has asked us or commanded us to go out into the wilderness for 3 days. to go worship him. That's all we're asking for. And he says, but I know something's going to happen. What's going to happen? What's Pharaoh going to say? He's going to say no. And then he says, so I'm going to be done asking, and I'm going to do what? I'm going to show them, right? You don't want to? Fine, I'll make you. Have you ever had that response to your children? When you ask them to do something over and over again and they just don't want to do it? Have you ever had to force them to do things? I'm getting some eyebrow raises. Like, maybe. Yeah, right? And everybody's thinking of that one time. They say, I'm going to make you do this, right? And that's basically how God's going to treat Pharaoh. Is you think you're big and you're bad and you're tough. And you're going to see that you're not. In fact, you're going to see it so much. When they leave the land in verses 21 and 22, what's going to happen? They plunder them. And in fact, they plunder them. They just ask, right? Like the King James says plunder, and it's like, well, that kind of gives a wrong term because it's the right term that they take all the stuff, but it's not like they run in there and they give me all your stuff. No, they literally just go and ask. And all the Egyptians will eventually be like, yeah, just whatever you need, right? Yeah, let's get you out of here. You want the gold, you want the silver, you want the jewels? Yeah, just get you out of here. Somebody turn to 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 1 through 5. So we today, right, we get our call to action. We know that God's with us. But then the next question is, well, what am I supposed to teach? Right? Somebody read 2 Timothy 4, verses 1 through 5. All right, perfect. So what are we supposed to preach? Verse 2 there of 2 Timothy. Preach what? The word. Right? God, what am I supposed to tell them? The word. What's the word? The gospel. Your Bible. Right? The message of Christ. It's all right here. It's all written down for you. Reason why I like teaching classes like this that are just straight kind of more textual, it's because it's a lot easier for me not to really mess up too bad. And if you've been a teacher, you know that, right? Why? Because you're just saying, well, here's the Bible. Here's what it says, right? And we need to take that and realize that's all God's asking us to do, right? Is to go to other people, realize He's with us, and then say, here's the Bible. And when they say, well, what about this? What should your response be? Let's take a look. Let's find it together. Let's see it, right? If you ask a lot of different people, a big thing that they'll say is, well, this person said, I believe. This person said, I think. This person said, well, let's go ask my preacher. But you went and said, let's see what God has to say. And that will have a much bigger impact than you actually realize on a lot of people. You actually just say, well, let's look at the Bible. Let's see what God has to say. And that's what Paul tells Timothy to do here. He says, preach the word. At any time, right? In season, out of season. He's basically saying, anytime, preach the word. Any thoughts on that idea? Yes. Yep. Yeah, exactly. And I think one really good thing is too, right, is everybody kind of has, like their own individual talents, right? You may not be good at starting a conversation with somebody, but you could all be really good at answering their questions, right? So find somebody who's good at starting that random conversation. Don't come to me. I'm not that guy, right? Yes. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Exactly, right. The last 2 points I want to make here real quick. We only got a couple minutes left. In chapter 4, right, he's going to tell Moses, right, you're going to show them my power, right? Because God says, well, they're going to ask for a sign. What am I going to do? And so what does God say? He says, see that staff in your hand? He goes, yeah. He says, throw it down. So he throws it down, and what does it turn into? A snake. And then God says, okay, pick it up. And he picks it up, and it's a staff. And then he says, now take your hand and put it in your coat. So Moses does it. He says, pull it out. And what's his hand now? Has leprosy all over it. It says it's white as snow. And then he says, all right, put it back in your coat. And he does it. And he pulls it back out, and it's healed. And God says, these are the signs you're going to give them, right? You're going to show them my power. And then Moses kind of comes up with, we all say it's a lame excuse, but it's probably the number one excuse we all use of, well, I just can't talk. I'm not a good speaker, right? And so God, it actually says, right, Adam's told us this, and you can read it. God gets angry with Moses at that point, almost kind of understanding like, okay, right, now you're just trying anything. And he tells him, I'm going to send you your brother. Your brother is actually on his way already, coincidence, right? You're going to see him. He's going to be happy to join you. I'm going to tell you what to say. You're going to tell him what to say, and he'll talk to Pharaoh for you. And in fact, if you look at verse 16, he says, he will be your spokesman unto the people. He shall be, even he shall be to you instead of a mouth, and you shall be to him instead of God. Right? In other words, he says, Moses, the relationship you and I have, where I tell you what to do, and you do it, and you say it, you're going to have that relationship with Aaron. And it's very important to realize when we get to Pharaoh, Aaron's the one doing most of the talking. And Moses is telling Aaron, hey, we're going to go in there, you're going to tell him this. If you're Pharaoh, and you know Moses is the guy in charge, and his brother, who's the lackey, for lack of a better term, is the guy talking to you, how's that going to make you feel? Some things to consider. Thank you all very much, and we will pick up on Sunday.